Hello and welcome to the Wire Wrap, our weekly show where we discuss recent developments ahead of the 2024 Lok Sabha polls. With me today is Apar Gupta. He is a lawyer and the founding director of the Internet Freedom Foundation, and also Seema Chishti, who is the editor of The Wire. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you.
So we're recording on Friday after a really happening Thursday evening. Two big things have happened, so let me just start by putting those on the table. The first was that the Election Commission of India made public the final round of the data that the Supreme Court has asked it to release on electoral bonds. This final data now has the unique bond numbers associated with each bond, which means we can track which corporate donors or individuals were giving money to which parties. This wasn't possible with the previous data. And there's a lot of investigation happening and it's going to take a lot of time given the amount of data, but the revelation itself was a long time coming and was a big deal. And then the second thing was the arrest of Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal by the Enforcement Directorate. This was in the alleged liquor policy scam case. There are two other AAP leaders who are already in jail for this, as well as a BRS leader, K. Kavita. And also this makes him the second sitting Chief Minister after Hemant Soren, who's been arrested in recent months by central agencies. Today, K. Kavita's bail plea was supposed to be heard by the Supreme Court, but the court said it would not hear it and that she should approach the trial court. After which Kejriwal, whose petition was coming up before the same bench, withdrew his petition. Now, these are two seemingly separate events, just happen to occur very much at the same time. But there's already one very obvious link that has come out between them, which was revealed yesterday in a report by Project Electoral Bond, which is a collaboration between some news organizations and independent journalists. This was that there's a company in Hyderabad, and a businessman who is the head of the company, who is the son of the person who founded the company, was arrested in the same Delhi liquor policy case in 2022. 5 days after his arrest, his company gave 5 crore in electoral bonds to the BJP. This is, we know from the data that came out yesterday. Very soon after, he was given bail because the ED did not argue against his bail petition, and then he became an approver in the case. His company, Aurobindo Pharma Limited, later gave another 25 crore just very soon after, also to the BJP through electoral bonds. So in this scenario, it is possible to link these two seemingly disparate events and read them together. But let's start by talking about the electoral bonds data. There's a lot of data that's come out, and it's going to take some time to really pass through all of it. But Seema, what are your big takeaways from this?
So I think first things which you said, Jahnavi, at first is that it's such a big day that the data has come out. Just the data not coming out was a big deal. Yeah. There is 12,000 crore worth of data. For 6.5 years, it's been sitting there. The Supreme Court wasn't listening to it for so long, and suddenly the data is out. So we must first recognize the monumentality, if you like, of the fact of the data coming out and the perseverance of people, civil society, all the lawyers, public opinion that pushed for this. So I think in a sense it has kind of unveiled the entire sewage system underground, the entire plumbing of several things, and almost as you said that there is an arrest, there is ED action, and there is this, which may seem like separate events, but it's like the data itself sitting in silos. We must kind of break those silos and see the patterns. And the electoral bond data now coming out with company being mapped to political parties, being mapped to times when it was given, allows us the luxury to join those dots. So my first thoughts are brilliant that it's come out, and we'll be able to talk about electoral funding, financing of political parties, how this method, which has been invented, if I may use a hyperbolic term, almost to destroy the right to equality. Because what was earlier one Indian and one vote, anyway struggling to reach one person, one value, as Ambedkar put it. But one person, one vote gets destroyed by tons of cash. So we are able to actually see how that sort of mess up is taking place. That for me is the biggest takeaway.
Yeah. Apar, if you could talk a little bit about the court's role in both of these situations. You know, the Supreme Court judgment has been celebrated.
Yes.
For saying that this data needs to come out.
Yes.
For pushing through after the EC gave only, the SBI and then the EC gave only part of the data, which didn't allow us to look at these quid pro quo patterns and whether they exist.
Yes.
And then also what happened today with K. Kavita. Kapil Sibal was appearing for her in the court, and when the Supreme Court said that he should approach the trial court, he said that if the history of the court were to be written, this time would not be seen as a golden time.
Yes.
So can you just comment on what you think of this?
So I think both these cases underscore firstly, what's the importance of the court's role in a political situation where there is one party which has an immense amount of, let's say, popularity and power, and it wields it. And I think in the electoral bonds case, what you see is that civil society, constitutional lawyers, and the court act to their promise, right? And it's not about us not liking which party is in power, it's about it being put into a check in terms of its ability to act legislatively and as the executive organ of government within a limit which is prescribed by the Constitution. That only happens when the court acts. Now, the second instance with regard to K. Kavita, I think it's fair to also look at the broader social commentary which is happening today. We're 2 months away from the elections, and the Enforcement Directorate, which on record has been called again and again, even in the electoral bonds case, as somewhat of a enforcement agency which incentivizes a corporate donor to donate to the party in power. I think that link is clear. And secondly, it then is also used and serves a political interest in which it prosecutes overwhelmingly people who are from the opposition parties in India. 95%, 95%, right?
Yeah.
So here I think so there is also a need for us to look at not only the role of the court and what it can check, but essentially even enforcement agencies and authorities which are emboldened the popular narratives of anti-corruption, in which you say everyone is corrupt, right? And if we do presume everyone is corrupt, then we must also acknowledge everyone is not being prosecuted. So I think the gulf between both of them may be explained by more academic lawyers as a polyvocal court, that there's this bench, there's this judge. But I think it's also fair to say that when I saw the electoral bonds judgment and the court persisting with that course of action, that there was a degree of surprise. I'll say it very honestly, Jahnavi, because recently I've not seen that judgment being turned into an actual action which can hurt the government, which can hurt the Bharatiya Janata Party. This happened here. And if I can put it down to some reason here, and I only say it because I maybe have grown into some cynicism, as much as I love the Supreme Court and what it can do, is the reasoning given by Pratap Bhanuveta, that maybe the court wants to maintain some facade of institutional respectability in terms of it acting in some cases and thereby showing that it has that power, while not acting on every instance which is placed before it. So I think there was an op-ed by Pratap Bhanu Mehta in which he was saying that maybe the Supreme Court is acting in some cases to show that it still can act.
Okay, so I'm conflicted about whether that is the reason. I would like to be less cynical than Apar, because for me what this sort of also demonstrated, I'm sure he knows better, he's inside the place as it were, is that it showed us the power of institutions, what modern independent institutions can do and how they're the guardians of any democracy. There can be no, democracy is not mobs voting somebody in and that person, whoever that person may be, ruling like a king or a queen. It's about institutions mediating that sense of representation handed to somebody and acting as checks and balances. And that was on display by just the one order, which I share your surprise, but I think they kind of did it.
But why? We shouldn't be surprised.
That's a good idea. You're right, we shouldn't be surprised. But I think sort of it's like hope versus experience kind of thing. So we were like, okay, given track record so far, that we were surprised. But there is I think the Indian Supreme Court has always wanted to be seen as kind of, it's a bit like the media, which of course that illusion is gone now about being vibrant media and so good media, Indians, plural media, etc., which has now taken a big knocking. But maybe the courts would, on a case of electoral and democratic finance, maybe globally, whatever it's said on this would really matter. And the whole opacity around electoral bonds is such an outlier situation, given what's happening in the world. I'm not even sure what the Russian and Turkish laws are on that, Apar, maybe you know better. But at least as far as Western liberal democracies go, when it comes to the appointment of election commissioners, the sort of people who conduct the electoral, the monitoring authority, as it were, and in terms of funding, the debate is very sophisticated, and India kind of does not do well on both those scores. We're perhaps the only country amongst all prominent democracy amidst Boris Johnson's D10, as it were, where the governments pick the election commission and where funding is opaque and we don't know. So maybe the Supreme Court, I'm speculating here, wanted to not go down in the annals of history as being the court that tick-marked and signed off on the world's worst, opaque, darkest scheme to fund elections. And mind you, this is the world's what? Biggest democracy? Greatest? What's the word? Largest democracy.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. But then even today when the Kejriwal was produced in I think Rao's Avenue it was, the ASG brought up the statement of the approver I mentioned before. I mean, this is not the Supreme Court, it's a lower level court. But this is information that is now out there where we can draw a clear line between him being arrested, him paying the BJP, him turning approver, to now this very same case being used against opposition politicians. And still his statement is seen as holding water in a court. So to what degree is this, sure, it's great that we have this information, but then what?
Apar, you go for that. I mean, how long does it take for information to trickle down and reach the formalized sort of portals you kind of inhabit and argue?
See, here's the thing also that if you're premising so firstly, if you're just arguing for the process of bail and liberty, this may not be a part of that formal proceeding. This may be what lawyers call an argument at prejudice, which is essentially to prejudice the court. It's not the meat. It's only some kind of seasoning in that sense. And the second thing is that I think the data from the electoral bonds disclosure will be used. I'm quite certain it will be used in legal proceedings, but it will not be used directly. For instance, if an allegation is made against an opposition politician for money laundering, they need to defend themselves and dispute that I have not done this. And then they need to bring up the partisan nature of the inquiry. Because if they do premise a defense on the partisan nature of the inquiry as their primary defense, the judge will quite easily turn to them and say, well, you just go and file a complaint. This is not your defense. You are saying somebody else is doing it and you're not catching that person. That doesn't absolve you of your theft.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you also, Seema, about the ED's role here. Opposition parties now have been saying before election, after election, that it's become a tool in the hands of the BJP to really go after them, especially pre-election. They tried to file a petition in the Supreme Court about this. The Supreme Court didn't want to hear it. And we're dealing with an ED currently that doesn't even have a director. It only has an acting director, despite the government's many efforts to try and keep the previous one on for basically forever. So what is the ED doing? And an agency that has so much power currently, it can arrest a sitting chief minister from its house and doesn't have a director. What does that mean?
I think that means full and total central control, because what the case of the ED brings to light, I mean, the ED is not some great constitutional office. It's only a department of the finance ministry, really. It comes under Nirmala Sitharaman's charge. But other important constitutional offices have been kept vacant for so long. The Law Commission, which is now opining on big things, it will probably come out with a personal law thing as well, is kept vacant for more than 2.5 years. So the shell is there, but the democratic stuff of it, you know, the bones and the blood and the muscle, that's kind of taken out. So I think the same thing happens with other agencies when officers think and know that this is some sort of a master who's kind of ordering the agency to go do this, do that. That's the sense we get. And it's not as if India hasn't seen moments of madness of agencies. We've seen that with a declared emergency. We've seen that in mad times of certain finance ministers, certain prime ministers as well. You had a raid Raj. When people talk about, you know, Mr. VP Singh as finance minister, his raid Raj, etc., as it were, very kind of disparagingly. So it's possible in a democracy, in a liberal democracy, for people who want to and believe in centralization to capture power. And I think the ED, IT, such organizations are set up to do that. Because, you know, I mean, for example, look at this Congress scenario where something 30 years ago has been pulled out. And I'm sure there's a parking ticket violation that all of us have done, something done like that, which can, given the labyrinthine kind of legal system we have, put you through a process which damns your reputation and just casts you as a villain. So I think that's been put to good use.
More than a villain, somebody who's incompetent.
Yeah.
Incapable to
Incapable
lead
to
and,
even, yes.
and represent you and
Yes.
your interests.
Yeah.
This is the Singapore model of
Yes.
essentially allowing a opposition but showing to the people repeatedly that their opposition is a subject of ridicule
Yes.
rather than a legitimate force which can challenge power of the ruling.
Absolutely right.
Wow.
And I think this is a tool that we've seen kind of used across by autocrats across the world now. So we're almost seeing like a template, and that stencil is visible now
Yes, because there's no
Yes.
scrutiny on the BJP.
Nothing.
In that sense.
There is no, because
So-
you've muzzled the media, the institutions are like that. So and also officers imagine. I'm sure that officers were very circumspect, for instance, in UPA too, because they thought that when a government changes, there can be some knock on our door telling us about what we've done wrong
Yes.
and question us. It seems that sense has gone away, which explains all the big rallies and the 400, these big projections by Mr. Modi, that you go out and say that, so everybody falls in line, that there is no Tina, there is no alternative.
Make a 100-day plan.
Make a 100-day plan because I'm coming back. I
back.
mean, you plan for 2093. I mean, what's going on here? What's going on here is to establish a sense of eternalism, that I'm the monarch and I plan for at least 1,000 years and 100 years on a bad day. So once you do that, the officers fall in line, and you have these scenarios like ED officers also playing along, because I think it is for all. I mean, there's a argument I have with bureaucrat friends on that, but there's a limit to which a bureaucrat implements government policy and decides to become partisan and part of the political machinery and just sign, because they say that there's great power in even the lowest bureaucrat writing a note in the margins of a memo. But I don't know if that's happening. And even if it's happening, there's such a bar on information coming out that we won't know. So maybe after the Modi government goes and we have a new government in place, this will come out and those officers will be held to account if they kind of, because their allegiance is to the constitution and not to a party manifesto, whichever party that may be.
But speaking of scrutiny of the BJP and democratic institutions, I think that's a good segue into the next development we can talk about, which is the Election Commission's action, in which it said that these WhatsApp messages that a whole lot of us received, including people abroad who didn't have Indian phone numbers, from Viksit Bharat Sampark under the IT ministry, with the IT ministry address.
Yes.
These were mass WhatsApp messages that were sent out after the Model Code of Conduct was in place. It had a letter from the Prime Minister himself, in which he talked about what he said were achievements of his government, and then asked for feedback from citizens. And the EC got multiple complaints about the timing of these messages, that this kind of mass campaigning was happening after polls had been announced. And the ministry claimed that it was because of some sort of system error, and they went to send it earlier and it went out later. So the ECB has basically said that don't do this anymore, you can't send these messages. It hasn't taken any action on the messages that were sent, but it has said you can't send them further. But it hasn't questioned what the government was doing, what this means for privacy, the fact that the government was using so much personal information for campaigning. So Apar, why don't you talk about that? This is something you work on.
You know, I got this message 2 times, Jahnavi, actually. So, yeah, and the first time I posted it, I think...
Really wanted your feedback.
Yeah, so here's the thing, you know, MIT, which is the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, also operates this platform called MyGov.
Yes.
And MyGov sometimes runs these contests where you can make an illustration about something, okay, for influencers, etc. But also conduct sometimes public consultations, which are not well designed, and you need to log into it with your mobile number. So I thought maybe it's, you know, that database which they're using, and that's why I got this message specially for myself, because I have been a responsible citizen and they want to seek my views. But then again I got it at night, at, you know, like after 2 days, after March 15th, I think so, on about 1 a.m. and I woke up to it in the morning and I was really glad.
It was technically a good morning message.
It was a good morning message, and you know, I just didn't even know that whether I should type in stop and it stops. Okay, and getting to it a little much more seriously, I first reported it as spam, which brings me to the business users policy which WhatsApp itself has. So a lot of people have just looked at it from the lens of a violation of the moral code of conduct. And it's a good frame to look at it. But imagine that the same guy comes back, okay, and the same guy wants to send you a WhatsApp message every day from a different number.
morning message,
A
yes.
good morning message, okay, because they want you to have a good day, okay.
Twice.
Okay, twice.
Very good morning.
Okay, I know both of you are laughing because guys don't have this experience. Okay, so but still, okay, it's just weird, right? So if you look at the policy which WhatsApp has, and it says it enforces it very strictly, is that it says that the message which you send as a business user to another person needs to be based on consent and a express opt-in, right? Which is why whenever somebody creates a community, you get a broadcast message. There is you know that you have said, yes, add me. You remember? Everyone has done that. Nobody did this. I think we opted it in by default, okay? And even when you reported it as spam, because the first time I did report it as spam and it was blocked, I got another message. So it meant that they may be using different accounts or numbers tied to different accounts in that sense, right? Now, this brings up a lot of questions, even if it's not targeted to all Indian citizens, because we know it's gone to people abroad. And people who have visited India and they are foreign nationals and are abroad have said that they visited India and possibly gave their mobile number at the for the purposes of getting an Indian visa. So it means that the databases which are being used by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, let's leave aside for the purposes of this kind of promotional message, but even much more generally, they have access to databases which are created by the Ministry of External Affairs. Now, what needs to happen in this instance are some clearer answers rather than the Election Commission just saying that you send this message 2 times to a lot of people and people made fun of everyone and data security and the moral code of conduct on Twitter, so stop doing it, okay? I think there also needs to be some higher level of accountability which needs to be demanded by the Election Commission at this point in time, okay, in which it not only requires these messages to be not sent in future, but even for the message which is already sent, to investigate it to some extent, because then we get to know where did the data come from, how much money was paid, right, from the public exchequer, and I think all of that is very, very necessary. So I do think that this is only the start. And the other thing I'd just like to quickly mention is that before elections, if you also remember around, I think so 2014, all of us got SMS messages, right? And in 2019, there was a private television channel which was launched on OTT
Which was called
Namo TV.
Which was
Without a license.
Why it was called Namo TV, because that doesn't ring any bell.
Yeah, so
and it was just airing the Prime Minister was speaking non-stop. He was addressing, and nobody else was getting a word in edgeways, the children or other people he was speaking
So
to.
it's not like other parties don't do robocalls, but I think what's important for us to understand is this level of technical sophistication with the Bharatiya Janata Party itself acknowledges that it's adept at using digital platforms and mass messaging. It is using it in a way which sometimes has very low regard for individual privacy. And even if you're not bothered by that message right now, I think it sets up a very kind of a slippery slope for the government to get into your life more and more on a daily basis.
Could it also be an indicator of other things the government is doing? I mean, what else does it tell us? Other than this message being like not okay, what does this tell us about what the government could be doing with data sets? Our data, is all data kind of in one place now? Is all the external affairs data, the tourism data? And
I think there may be different databases, Seema, because it's like really hard to unify databases even if you use Aadhaar, because some of them are automated, some of them are not data sets
and
which
foreign
talk
nationals
to,
won't have Aadhaar.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Like,
But I have to confess, I didn't get this message.
Wow. She's got really cool privacy practices. We
Jahnavi,
should learn from her.
how did
I
you-
blocked it and reported it as a spam, but so I didn't get it a second time. But you know, I got a very creepy feeling after blocking it and reporting it. What if there's a data set monitoring those who block and mark it as spam versus those who, that's data for them, right? So I felt stupid having done that. because I had given them data about my preferences. And I know lots of people who did it. But even not but thinking that I'm being very defiant and doing that, I've actually revealed a data point about my number.
Yes.
So yeah, not
just
okay.
to go back to it, I want to speak a little about the Election Commission's role in this, because it has been questioned before 2019 and before assembly elections, and now for people have said it goes soft on the BJP. So it's taken this action, it said don't do this anymore, but I mean it's also possible that they weren't planning to do it again anyway, they were done. It had happened already. So Seema, there have been several questions raised about the Election Commission. There was an election commissioner who had a controversial appointment who resigned very suddenly just before the elections, and now we have 2 new election commissioners who've been appointed by the government despite a dissenting voice from the only member of opposition in that selection panel, Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary. So where do you think the EC stands today as an institution? You were talking earlier about your faith in these institutions and how the Supreme Court has in some ways instilled it. How do you see the EC's action in that?
I think I'm worried about it because all indices of democracy, which are being studied by institutions which have a track record of doing this for decades now, have always held clean elections as something where India scores well on. And as they say, the incumbents leave their keys on the table and go away, and you have a peaceful transfer of power, which is not very common in the global south, really. So India really kind of, held its head high. But over the past couple of years, there have been doubts about this clean election index ranking and ratings and evaluation of India for reasons of funding. But I think the Election Commission's role is really now coming up for scrutiny. There was a time when the Election Commission, and of course, Mr. Seshan had his own problems, etc. But he would take on powerful, popular chief ministers like Lalu for whatever may be the politics of that, And Lalu was famously saying it is the nation versus Seshan, etc. But there was this thing. There was Lingdo who took on Mr. Modi and sort of, said that he's going to postpone those elections, that those people living in those camps after the Gujarat violence of 2002 could not be expected to vote. So there was this whole power of the Election Commission acting autonomously, which held great weight globally and even instilled confidence amongst people that it was like this. So I think a big cloud hangs over the Election Commission, and I'm, for instance, deeply interested to know why Mr. Arun Goyal went. Also, I'm very keen to know how he came in so quickly. So the entire episode leaves me very confused. I have very little information on how he applied for VRS. He was quickly granted that within a day, and we know the pace at which the Indian bureaucracy functions, like even when it's feeling very quick. He gets in quickly, and even then what happened was almost in a way to sidestep the Supreme Court ruling, which made it very clear that there had to be like a bipartisan approach to appointing election commissioners. So that happens, and then he exits in a hurry. So what happened here? And suddenly you have 2 new election commissioners who just kind of walk in, and less than 24 hours after that, the elections are announced. So I think this whole business is like, it's almost like electoral bonds that we've accepted like the secrecy of it. And I don't see why we should accept the secrecy of it. And if I was the government of the day, which is expecting a re-election, I should be very worried about the credibility of this process. Because there's this other thing I'm not getting into right now about EVMs. But when it comes to instilling confidence in EVM machines or just doing things which an election commission needs to do, I don't see a lot of confidence coming my way.
And I mean, just talking about confusions that citizens can have with the Election Commission, electoral bonds is actually a great example of that, because through the whole process, they've had so many changing stances. At first, they were like, no, this is a really bad idea, it's going to mess things up. Then they were actually, there's no reason to stay the scheme, it's fine. Yes. So yeah, it's another place where we can be confused. Like, what do you really think?
Yes.
Yeah, but then I think that brings us to the last thing I wanted to talk about today, which is another, maybe another thing that could bring out your hope aspect in the institutions.
Oh Lord.
Which is that on Wednesday, the Centre notified the Press Information Bureau's fact-checking unit as the central government fact-checking unit that can flag any content online as false or misleading, which has to do with the union government. And the Bombay High Court had earlier said it won't stay this process, but yesterday the Supreme Court has stayed it, and now that stay will be in place until the Bombay High Court decides on these challenges to the pertinent rules in the IT rules. So now the PIB's fact check unit has been shown to have got it wrong, plausibly on purpose, several times in the past, in a way that it seems like what it's most concerned about are not facts so much as making sure that the government's narrative is not questioned. So Apar, I know the IFF has been an active player in this. So what were your concerns?
So I think a lot of the work which has been done by my colleagues has been in court, has been in policy, and even before of councils who work at IFF represented parties in court, there was a immediate sense of foreboding which came over, because if you look at the power, it's not a fact-checking power only, Jahnavi, it's also that it's a very broad fact-checking power in which the Ministry of Electronics and IT can designate any body of the government through notification central government can, with respect to business of the central government, and identify anything which is fake, false and misleading. And these phrases, fake, false and misleading, are not defined. So these are terms of art, so they can mean anything to the person who's applying this. And what's the effect? This is the dangerous part.
Yeah.
It results in an immediate power of censorship. It means that as soon as something is quote unquote fact checked, it's essentially removed from the internet. It did not exist. And this by its very nature is an Orwellian power. Now, you may say, well, censorship exists everywhere. Well, censorship does exist, but to moderate it, there are legal safeguards which are created, such as the opportunity which is given to a party who may have authored a report, right? And it may be a reporter, it may be a journalist, it may just be somebody on social media. But you need to actually tell them that we are, as the government, that we are going to censor your post, and these are the reasons we think why we will do it, because it's illegal under the constitutional framework, under Article 19(2) and these specific laws. So please give us your response. This is a notice, it gives an opportunity of a hearing. None of this was here. There's no public order which is issued by the government when it does this either. So there's no transparency, and it hurts all of us. And coming so close to the elections, when they have notified it on March 20th, I think it was really, really cool for the Supreme Court to stay it on March 21st.
Yeah, I think the cool thing went up for me, institutional power, yeah. At least a demo, kind of, here's a demo to what institutional power can do. And I think this critical point, of course, about the executive arrogating to itself the role of a tribunal, what should be either, excuse me, a quasi-judicial authority or a body of even experts. Here is a government directly saying that, take it off. So I think that was what made it very dangerous. Yeah. And, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. You were saying?
No, I mean, I was just going to ask you that one of the petitioners was the Editors Guild of India, and they were specifically concerned about what this would mean for the media. And could you tell us a little bit about that? What would it mean for the media?
I think the fact of the timing is critical, because at a time when the government, you're stripping down government kind of excess power in order to enforce a level playing field. Yeah. At that time, you're notifying the PIB, whose good job is to kind of be the government's propaganda arm. That's your job, do it. But to kind of do this side job as, coming down, clamping down on what it regards as fake news, basically putting out anything critical of the government or mildly critical or just questioning the government out of business.
Let's come to a direct example. Is Modi a dictator? They would say this is fake, false and misleading.
How
because these are one or two things.
Yes.
It goes off. So
has it gone off?
It's not, but I'm saying that if this power exists, you can do that very, very easily, right? And that is the issue here.
Yes, and that's the issue here, and also who decides it. I mean, this is where the world is kind of embroiled in debate. This is the stuff of grave discussions, philosophical questions here. The government of India cannot decide that our kind of department or whatever, 3 department heads, or the PIB, the Press Information Bureau, is going to decide that this is fake, false and misleading, and decide and put it out of action. So I think the idea was to kind of notify it so it could carry on doing those things. Yeah. So at least pull off stuff off the net before it...
Which it has been doing.
Which it has been doing.
Yeah,
and
blocking.
See, although the creepy thing is, we've seen this firewall. We're not saying that India is worse than China. No one's saying that, or Turkey or Iran. But India claims to be a vibrant democracy. It talks about being the world's largest, in fact, mother of democracy. That's why it's going to be held to those high standards. So for us to say that, please internet shut down, capital of the world, please look at what other countries do. Well, that's not the point. You're not saying you're Saudi Arabia or China. If you said that, we know firewalls exist. You're saying you're a democracy, you want all the perks of democracy and sit on the democratic high table, then I'm sorry, you talk about it. And I think the digital square is no concern of some elites and all now. It's something where the government has dragged you onto. It has digitized everything. There are things that if I was poor and I cannot access ration till I have sort of some biometric savviness or a digital sense about me. At that point, you cannot go policing the digital world like you're a dictator and expect to be called a democracy. And that is what the fact check unit was kind of geared up to do.
Yeah, so I think it is a relief that at this time, at this crucial juncture, the Supreme Court has stepped in.
Yes.
And it's also nice that we have some hope to express in this show this week.
Yes. You were saying something about Elvish Yadav you wanted to...
No, yeah, so before the show, okay, and I was saying that, off camera, that's the term to use.
Is it? Sorry, no.
Yeah. So Seema, thank you for bringing this up, and it's not a... People are in jail and that's not a reason to cheer. I just like to make it clear. I was just saying that, it's curious that when people were also trending that Arvind Kejriwal is arrested, some other people were still trending that Elvish Yadav should also be released from jail. So it just showed very weirdly to me that the cacophony which is there quite often about people being completely invested in politics, etc., in the online space is sometimes not what is touching upon the lives of maybe a broader general public who possibly prefers to watch less of news television or sadly even The Wire, but Big Boss.
But tell me something, I have to get in here now. You provoke me. But Elvish Yadav is political, isn't he?
He is.
So tell us a bit about, Jahnavi, do you know about Elvish?
So his bio is, I think, Virat Hindu or Proud Hindu or something like that. Okay, and this entire, so anyways, it's really funny because I know about all of this because it's cringe watching and hate watching for me. So I know about these YouTube influencers because so Carrie Minati or Elvish Yadav. Okay, I'm just telling people I really consume bad content, okay, which is not cool.
No, but I believe Elvish got into a spat with somebody else who's also a YouTube influencer. And
So this is what happens. So Elvish Yadav builds up his entire fandom on the basis of just being a very proud nationalistic Hindu, okay, saying I'm standing up for, and he's basically he builds an entire fandom in which he says I'm doing langar, I'm doing dan, I'm doing all of that. And then there's a celebrity exhibition match in which Sachin Tendulkar is also playing, but also the most recent, Big Boss winner Munawar Farooqi is also playing, and who's a stand-up comedian, and he's cracked some jokes which are considered anti-Hindu, and Elvish Yadav does something sportsman-like which is very unlike him. He goes and hugs Munawar Farooqi at the end of the match, and this sparks a complete fracture in the community which supports him. And 2 weeks later, because there are already criminal charges against him, he gets arrested in something else. But
This sounds like the first topic we were discussing.
So here's the thing also, you have Arvind Kejriwal, who is a legitimate politician and has an actual impact on the people of lives of Delhi, which is possibly a incredibly big city, okay? And then you have this online fandom of a person who I personally find has not done or contributed anything significantly in terms of public interest except possibly entertain people, okay, and that too towards a certain form of public exhibition which is characterized by divisiveness in society, and yet at the same time people seem to be very rallying behind him and saying that release him from jail. And he is political. He has appeared on stage with Khattar, and I think this is also showcasing why India has the lowest data rates in the world per GB, and why YouTube influencers are such a big thing in this election.
Yeah, so I think this is a very good, while you're downplaying, kind of bringing these two things together, I think this is critical because this is what the digital world has now come to mean. You also have people otherwise who sing some very objectionable kind of music which is available online, who are contesting elections, and one is contesting from
And do reach a
Asansol,
sort of
who
cult status.
Yeah, cult status through this whole online vehicle. So I think this whole merging in such a big, large democracy of online and real life kind of effect just tells you how we need to guard the digital square. And I think all rules and all constitutional rights that apply offline must apply online. There's no getting away from that. Yeah.
On that note, I think we can wrap this up. Thank you both so much for joining me, and thank you all for watching. We hope you will watch again next week.